Hey guys, welcome back to Marlins 9. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger, and today I'm joined on the podcast with Glenn Geffner, former voice of the Marlins play-by-play. Glenn, thanks for coming on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeremiah. Thanks for inviting me on today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk some baseball with you, not just the Marlins, but delve a little bit into, some baseball history and questions surrounding the game today. But this is a Marlins podcast, and I've had a few guys on the podcast over the last few weeks. Everybody has different opinions on the direction of this team. I believe that right now the Marlins are kind of in a no man's land in terms of direction, to say the least. A lot of people are picking sides with Peter Bendix and company in the front office, and this is the way to do it. We're 100% on board. And a lot of people are more skeptical, on the skeptical side. So first off, what do you take away from the beginning of this season and the direction of the team overall?
Well, I think the concerning thing when you talk about the Marlins being kind of in no man's land right now, and I agree with that assessment, is this is year 7 of this ownership group. And this is rebuild number 2 for this ownership group after the first rebuild was bungled in the worst ways imaginable. And I was lined up with a lot of other people to give them the benefit of the doubt in the beginning and certainly hope for the best. Look, I grew up in South Florida. I grew up in a time when there was no Major League Baseball in this community. I dreamed of the day we'd have Major League Baseball in South Florida. Years later, I got the chance to broadcast the games for my hometown team. Can't ask for much more than that. Nobody wanted to see this work. And to this day, nobody wants to see this work more than I do. But unfortunately, things have been absolutely bungled. And you've got an owner who is in, I think, a little bit deeper than he bargained for right now financially. He's got partners. He's in a position where he cannot sell this team. People scream, just sell the team already, Bruce Sherman. If you're not going to spend, if you're not going to win, if you're going to lie to fans, just sell the team already. He can't sell the team because he overpaid so dramatically for the team when he bought it, $1.6 billion, including debt that he took on. He'd never come close to making that money back for him, and especially for his partners right now if he tried to sell the team. So he's got no choice but to try to cut corners at every turn and to try to save money at every turn. And that's how you end up with an absolutely non-competitive team with a terrible farm system, putting people in charge who've never run teams before. And here we are. And the one thing I'll say is for people who've gotten on Peter Bendix, I don't feel like this is all Peter Bendix's fault. Peter Bendix was brought in here for one reason only, because the owner has this vision now where we've got to cut everything down to the bare bones. Peter Bendix didn't decide to not spend any money on free agents this past offseason. That was the mandate he was given. That's why Kim Ng threw her arms up, because Kim Ng looked at where the team was at the end of last season and said, look, that was far from a perfect team. And anybody who read my Substack all year last year, View from the Bleachers, knows I wasn't buying what the Marlins accomplished in 2023 the way some people wanted to. And yet they were a playoff team with some decent pieces on it that had you spent some money at a time when it's not only about trying to win baseball games, but it's trying to win over a community and a fan base for the first time in decades here in South Florida, where it's really important to have some credibility and to give people reasons to come to the ballpark and support your team. But Bruce Sherman wouldn't do that. And that's why Kim Ng said, I don't need this anymore. And that was the context in which Peter Bendix was brought in. Yes, he worked at Tampa Bay, was never the front man, was never the ultimate decision maker with the Rays. Great franchise. They've accomplished a lot on a bare bones budget, and that's what he's being asked to do here. But they're really starting over from scratch. And in year 7, that's an awful place to find yourself, but that's where we are.
You mentioned it's interesting that you mentioned the ownership and the financial aspect of it, because when I look at Peter Bendix is brought in to emulate the Tampa Bay Rays way of running an organization, that's not on Bendix. He's run this way his whole life. He grew up in the Tampa Bay Rays analytical department. I don't necessarily agree with the way you run a baseball team when it's completely focused on analytics. If you listen to the pod, it's a mixture. It's a mixture of both. But when it comes to ownership, that is really where you see the financial aspect start to come into play. You mentioned Bruce Sherman is over his head in what to do right now, and his hands are tied. And that is really a testament to a bad business model that he put himself into. And then now it trickles down into the front office and ultimately the players and the fan base.
And
So
that's the legacy, Jeremiah. That's the legacy of Derek Jeter. And when Bruce Sherman brought Derek Jeter in and allowed Derek Jeter to have 100% control, and he took Derek Jeter's word for the fact that we're going to sell all these tickets and our corporate revenue is going to go through the roof, and I'm going to get you a better TV deal than David Sampson could have. I'm going to get you a great ballpark naming rights deal, and we're going to be rolling in dough, and we're going to be great. And Derek Jeter struck out on every single one of those things. Derek Jeter was a Hall of Fame shortstop, one of the great champions in the history of the game. There's no denying that. But does that qualify you to run a Major League Baseball team's business operation and baseball operation? I would say the answer to that is a pretty definitive no. And we've seen what happened there. And really, I would say the best thing that Bruce Sherman has done since taking over the Marlins is cutting ties with Derek Jeter. And remember, that was reported as Derek Jeter walking away because Sherman wouldn't spend. No, that was Bruce Sherman saying, Derek, you made all these promises. You didn't keep any of them. We've got to start over now. And he ran Derek Jeter out the door. And that's a big part of the reason why the Marlins are where they are right now, because of what happened under those years, 4 or 5 years under Derek Jeter.
it was a power dynamic, I believe, that Jeter really tried to run. And you saw that in the draft. I mean, yes, there's bad luck when it comes to drafting and free agents, but to consistently strike out on multiple first round draft picks, that tells me there's something inherently flawed in the scouting department. To strike out on free agents over and over again, it makes you wonder who is really having the ultimate say here. And you mentioned it. Jeter couldn't fulfill the promises. And it reminded me of when you have a Hall of Fame level player who wants to go into the upper levels of sports management and climb that echelon. It's not as easy as it looks, because for the football fans out there, look at John Elway in Denver. Consistently bad at drafting quarterbacks. A Hall of Fame quarterback himself, you feel like that should be the easiest job.
Look at Michael
And
Jordan in
it's not.
basketball. Look at
Exactly.
Michael Jordan's record.
And it's just another example, another feather in the cap, if you will, for failure when it comes to star athletes transitioning into an executive role. And it was always a very strange fit. And when Sherman took over, obviously they end up parting ways. And now you have Kim Ng come in, and Kim Ng, people forget, myself included, I was one of them, the fans that criticized Kim Ng in the early stages of her tenure. She was much maligned among the fan base. And then last summer rolls around, she pulls off a couple good trades. Everybody sings her praises. And then all of
Well,
a sudden she
remember,
says, I'm out.
remember the early stages of her tenure, though, Derek Jeter was still here, and Derek Jeter was still directing traffic. It was only
Right.
after Jeter's departure where Kim Ng had autonomy. So really, Kim Ng is on the hook for 2022 and 2023, I would say. Not what happened in 2021 and leading into 2022, because Jeter departed, I think, in February of 2022. So even that offseason between 2021 and 2022 was largely driven by Derek Jeter. And that's the Avisail Garcia signing, among other things.
And now moving forward, as we look forward, when the Luis Arias trade happened, and I know it's just one trade, right? I know it's just one trade, and it's for a guy who has questionable WAR output. If you're a big WAR guy, I myself value what I see on the field and the value players bring on the field. Baseball is not played on paper; it's played on the diamond. And Luis Arias, what he meant to this team, it far exceeds his WAR output, or, his OPS or his power, he can't hit for power. Well, the guy was getting 3-4 hits every night, multiple hits, getting on base. That's what you want out of a baseball player. He has that elite hitting tool. He gets traded, and now half the fans say, oh, he wasn't that good anyway. That was the right move. Okay, here's where I have the issue. I don't necessarily have the problem. The rebuild was happening. If you're going to rebuild, you have to get players who are guaranteed to make an impact, or are the closest to sure thing to make an impact. The headliner of that trade is a 19-year-old outfielder in single A with contact issues. That screams to me that is a reach, a reach, and you just traded the back-to-back batting champion for,
And
you
eating
know,
his salary.
a
And
gamble.
you're eating his
Exactly.
salary also.
In
If you're
addition
eating the
to the
salary, you
salary of
expect to be getting
Go.
elite players back.
Right.
In addition to Go, who has since gone, who's been DFA'd now. And they're paying him, they owe him, what, $8 million, I think, over the next 2 years. You're exactly right. You've left me with very little to say here, Jeremiah. But one thing I want to come back to, though, and it's related to this, is you talked about how they blew the drafts, they blew the free agent signings in the early years of this ownership. What they also blew were the big trades. And the advantage they had when they came in 2017 and 2018 was they had Giancarlo Stanton to trade and Marcelo Ozuna and Christian Yelich and JT Realmuto. Other than getting Sandy Alcantara back, which is a win in the Ozuna trade, and Zach Gallen in that deal, I'd rather have Zach Gallen today than Jazz Chisholm, but that's another topic. But other than that, they blew all those trades. Now, as they're going to rebuild number 2, they don't have a Stanton or a Realmuto or an Ozuna or a Yelich to trade. Arise was arguably the best chip that they had with you look at people's health questions and things like that. And they didn't get a great haul for him. Are they going to do better when they trade Tanner Scott or Luzardo or anybody else? They have to, because the way you rebuild is by trading talented players and bringing really good contributing pieces back. Well, they've just traded one of their best chips away. I don't think they got the return they could have. And there are no Stantons, Yelich's, Ozunas, or Realmutos sitting here to be traded over the course of the next couple of months, couple of years, whatever it is. They're in a tough spot to rebuild because they don't have those huge chips.
Well, the years of control, you mentioned Yelich, Ozuna, Stanton. One thing that Marlins fans should remember from those trades, especially Christian Yelich, is that Yelich had 5 years left on his deal, and they flipped him for,
It
at
was
the
a team-friendly
time,
contract. It was a
yeah,
team-friendly
7
contract.
years, $49 million. So he's $7 million a year, not breaking the bank. And you rushed and you flipped him for 2 top 100 prospects, both of whom busted. And that's the danger with prospects. And that is why I look at the Atlanta Braves model, for example. And obviously, you're never going to be the Atlanta Braves. But when the Braves rebuilt about 2014, 15, that time frame, when they started to tear it down, and I tweeted
They
this
kept
out.
Freddie Freeman. They kept
They
Freddie
kept
Freeman.
a core. They kept
Yep.
a core. And that is what Marlins fans don't seem to realize, is that Freddie Freeman, he was a lifetime Brave up until he left to the Dodgers. He saw 3-4 years of losing. Mike Fultonevich early on was traded, became an ace for Atlanta early on. Julio Teheran started with Atlanta in 2013 playoffs. They held on to him because he was part of the core.
He had some
And
good years.
that's how you rebuild, is you have a core. And that's who I thought Arias could be, because now you trade Arias, whose hit tool is going to be elite for years. If you're a good contact hitter, the contact is the last thing to go in a player. The power goes, of course, that's the first, but the contact is going to be there. So who do you build around? And that's why I think this team is truly directionless at the moment until you find a next core.
It's really unfortunate. And again, a difference in this situation relative to Atlanta or virtually any other team that's tried to rebuild is it's not just about what happens on the field. This owner came in and needed to build a fan base, needed to get fans interested, needed to make fans care, buy tickets, support this team, watch TV, listen to games on the radio. And I mean, at this point, particularly after what I consider lies that were told this past offseason, we want to get back to the playoffs. We're going to do it again. Even last year, we're going to take every incremental dollar of attendance and put it into the team. You come out and support this team. We're going to use that money to make this team better. I asked myself, how many more times can what's left of the Marlins fan base get kicked in the nuts before they just say, I can't do this anymore? And at this point, I really don't know how anybody can buy a ticket to support this owner and support this team. And I hate to say that because, again, I will maintain to this day, not financially, but in my heart, I have more invested in this team and this community than Bruce Sherman, than Peter Bendix, and any of these people. I want to see it work here. I'm like so many Marlins fans who want to see it work here. But how many times can you be lied to? Can you get kicked in the nuts and just keep coming back? And I understand that 13,000 on a Sunday yesterday. They want to boast about that. Hey, we had double digits, 13,000. It was the smallest crowd in Major League Baseball yesterday. It's embarrassing to have 13,000 on a Sunday with the defending World Series champions in town. They think that's a good crowd. But who are those 13,000 people? At this point, I guess, was there a giveaway, a Yuri bobblehead giveaway maybe yesterday?
Yeah,
Was
there
that yesterday?
was.
Okay, maybe the best giveaway of the year. But still, I don't understand how people can go out and support this team, support this owner at this point. To me, it is such a low point. And this franchise has had a lot of low points over the years, some very high points as well. But you can go every single owner over the decades. There have been some really low points. I don't know that it's ever been more hopeless than it feels right at this very moment.
And going back to, we talk about ownership, right? And the question now I think you can bring into play is, who would you rather have, Jeffrey Loria or Bruce Sherman as an
I don't
owner?
think it's even a question at this point.
No, I don't either.
Jeffrey Loria made mistakes. I understand that. There were PR issues. There were problems. I completely understand that. Jeffrey Loria did not bat 1,000. David Sampson did not bat 1,000. But you know what? They cared about this community. A lot of the mistakes that Jeffrey Loria made, I believe, were made because his heart was in the right place. We've got to get a better catcher in here. Should Salta Lamacchia have been the guy? No. Should John Buck have been the guy? No. He went around his baseball people, brought in people. But that was done for the right reason, if that makes sense to people.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you this, and this is more inside baseball type stuff. The culture of the organization was completely different under Jeffrey Loria and David Sampson. They treated people well. They treated people with respect. You appreciated working for these people. They were kind. They were generous. They were supportive of people's families. That's entirely different today. It was entirely different the day I walked out the door at the end of the 2022 season. I was getting text messages after midnight last night into this morning from people who are still in that building telling me that things have never been worse than they are right now. And that it shouldn't be that way. I know the average fan doesn't care about how Joe in accounting gets treated, but that's something. And in defense of Jeffrey Loria and David Sampson, they treated people well. You wanted to work for them. You wanted to give your all for them. They hired competent people. They supported the people they hired. That's not the case now. Now people leave. They don't get replaced. People are getting pulled into 200 different directions. VPs leave, and the lowest level people underneath them now are being forced to do the job of vice presidents. And it's just not the way, and with not a heck of a lot of financial benefit. That's not the way it should be, but that's the way it is. So to your original question, if Jeffrey Loria came back tomorrow, that would be a win for this franchise. And to me, there's no doubt about that.
I posed that question, Glenn, a couple months ago, actually, when the Marlins started really poorly. Um, and it was clear that this season was quickly going down the drain. And at first I said, I want to give Sherman a chance. I want to give Sherman a chance. And then we saw really what the whole plan was, the immediate trade of Luis Arias to the Padres. And things are starting to come together with the transparency of the media and the dishonesty there, where the front office will blatantly lie and tell the fans, tell reporters nothing. They won't
And there's
tell them
no
the
one
truth.
in the media right now who will ask those questions, who will
Exactly.
press anybody and anything. And that's why I kind of stepped into what I felt was a little bit of a void with the Substack that I started last year. And I'm writing much less this year, frankly, because I've lost interest in this
Right.
team because of what has happened. But I tried to be a voice last year and into this year, and I will still from time to time, for what's really going on and what they're not telling you and what no one else is asking and how things could be different or should be different. But there is no one, you go back a few years. You mentioned to me earlier that you had Joe Fracero on your show. You had Joe Fracero, Clark Spencer, you had Juan Rodriguez, you had Joe Capozzi. You had professionals covering this team, people who'd been around the game for years, who had relationships and contacts and were respected and knew when to ask questions and knew when to follow up and were respected enough to actually get real answers from people. Maybe not always answers you could use, but answers that could help you formulate some perspective and help share that perspective with people. Um, And you just don't, and it's no fault of their own that the people covering this team today are less experienced. In many respects, it's not just a Miami issue, it's a media issue in general, where younger, cheaper people are being hired to do the jobs. But there's not nearly as much coverage as there once was. Obviously, the Herald no longer has a beat writer. The Sun Sentinel and Palm Beach Post stopped covering this team a long time ago. MLB.com doesn't write nearly as frequently as it did when Joe Fracero was covering the team. It's a totally different dynamic. But to your point, so there is nobody to call out what's going on here. And that's a shame. And it's unfortunate for these fans who, as I've said a couple of times, just keep getting kicked below the belt.
That is exactly what Joe Frisaro said when he came on the show. His main gripe, record aside, team direction aside, his main gripe was who is asking the questions? Why is there no accountability? Why is there no accountability? And these reporters are not grilling the front office, grilling these guys, because at the end of the day, baseball is a business. Baseball is a cold business at times. I mean, we see individual players see the brunt side of the game all the time. Look at Sixto Sanchez. Look at the guy on the Tigers just today, Spencer Torkelson, number 1 overall pick. He's just been optioned to AAA. If you don't perform, you should not be getting rewarded or have your praises sung.
There's
And
got to be
that, I think,
accountability.
is exactly. And all I've seen, Glenn, all I've seen with the Luis Arias trade, there hasn't been any statement from the front office or ownership on why don't we want to extend this guy? He wanted to be here. What was the reason behind that? It was just it was the best trade we could get. It's ridiculous.
Well,
Ridiculous.
and just to finish up on Arise, again, if you're eating that salary, what was the rush to trade him on May 3rd? What if you're
Right.
saving money? I get it. If your only goal is to save a ton of money, I get it. But if you're trying to make the best deal you can and you're willing to eat his salary, why not take it closer to the deadline? When look at what happened with the Padres with Xander Bogaerts going down. All of a sudden, he's worth a lot more to the Padres today than he was the day they made the trade. They're much more desperate today than they were the day they made the trade, but they've got to rise already. You could have gotten more from the Padres then. You could have gotten more from any number of teams that might have had an injury or might have had underperformance. What was the rush to trade the guy on May 3rd if you're not saving the money? It makes no sense. And if you're going to trade him on May 3rd, why not have traded him in November? If you were going to do this all along, why not start this process in November? Why not devote your offseason to beginning this rebuild? It makes no sense. You talked about being directionless. That's one example after another of how directionless this organization seems to be right now.
It's sad. It's sad, especially after the playoff season and you gave fans hope. And it was, I know the wild card series to the Phillies hurt, you got a taste of postseason baseball. You have the COVID season, but for all intents and purposes, this was the first playoff baseball Marlins fans have seen in 20 years. And then
Meaningful games in
immediately after,
September. Yep.
right. And
Yep.
it's the playoff push. I haven't experienced this before. And it's like, all right, guys, let's run it back 2024. Like, what can this team do if we make an addition here at shortstop or catcher? And they did absolutely nothing under the pretense of we're going to compete. Like you said, trade Luis Arias in November if you were going to all along. Trade Luzardo if you didn't plan on competing. It's that
Before he
simple.
spends time on the IL, before his ERA is a
Right.
lot higher than you'd like it to be, where all of a sudden Luzardo's not worth as much today as he would have been in November, coming off the best year of his career.
And now I kind of want to talk, all this talk about Arias and his trade value had me thinking about the subject of war, the stat of war. Um, so a couple years ago, 2, 3 seasons ago, I think war really started blowing up. Like it had been a stat for a while, but just a few seasons ago is when everybody seemed getting on board with this stat. You have Fangraphs, you have Baseball Reference, and oh, who are the war leaderboards at this position, that position of all time? This is what makes the best player. You can never really figure out how you calculate it, number one, but everybody defending Bendix and the teardown, and I guess disvaluing Luis Arias points to war. War does not tell the full story. I don't know how to make that clear to people, but war is a singular part of a greater chain of events in a baseball player's career. But some people make it out to be the be all end all. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll drop WAR in with every other analytical number that you have and say, I am not anti-analytics at all. I think there is a
Hmm.
huge place for analytics in the game, in the front office, and player evaluation, in trying to find diamonds in the rough, and being able to see through somebody's bottom line numbers and say, wait a minute, there's more here. Look at the spin rate. Look at the exit velocity. I appreciate what analytics can do in that respect. But at the end of the day, there is value to watching the games and to getting to
Right.
know people and what makes people tick, and understanding why two guys with the exact same skill sets are going to have two entirely different careers. Two guys with the exact same wars can, over the next 5 years, have entirely different careers because of this guy's work ethic as opposed to that guy's work ethic, because of the way this guy keeps himself in shape as opposed to that guy, because of the way different body types age, because of whatever it might be. So, yes, I think there's a place for all this stuff, but I'm not one who looks at a trade and say, okay, we sent away 13.2 WAR and got 13.4 in return, so we won that trade. That's just, baseball isn't math class as far as I'm concerned. I teach sports broadcasting at Florida Atlantic University, and one of the lessons I teach my students is your broadcast should not be math class. You don't want to overwhelm people with these numbers, most of which you would sit there and need to explain to them every time you use them anyway, because the average listener has no idea what you're talking about. The average viewer has no idea what you're talking about. So, yes, there is a place for it, but I feel as though it's kind of become too mainstream in that everybody thinks he or she is a general manager now. Everybody thinks he or she should be a scouting director, and the answers are not all on the page at the end of the equation. There's a lot more to it than that. And yes, the numbers are important. And I hope that Peter Bendix has all of them. And I hope that he relies on them. I also hope he relies on his scouts in the field and the people that, before you draft somebody, sit down in the living room with the player and with mom and dad and with the high school coach and the guidance counselor, and learn more about this person. It's just not all about those numbers. And I think it's just too easy now, because these numbers are so mainstream, for people to rely too heavily on them. And for me, it takes away from the fun of the game. If you're a fan, enjoy the game. Enjoy watching Jazz Chisholm make a great play in center field. Enjoy watching somebody go first to third, or make an unbelievable defensive play. To me, that's what baseball is about. It's not about, okay, my team's got a higher WAR than your team. Why even play the game then? Why even play this season? Why not hand out the World Series rings in February, because this team had the best offseason? This team has the highest WAR if you add up everybody on the roster. So, again, I'm not anti-analytics. There's a huge place for them in the game. I do think, though, it's taken away from the fans' enjoyment of the game sometimes, and I think that's unfortunate.
You couldn't have said it any better, Glenn. It's a mixture of both, ultimately. Like you said, there is a place for analytics. I'm not going to deny that. I am not going to say don't have an analytics department, but to wager everything and to wager an entire direction of an organization on analytics itself, I think is a mistake. Because, like you said, not only does it take away from the game, but it takes away from the players playing the game when they have to not only factor the day-to-day life of the grueling grind of 162 games, but now they have to worry about all these analytics, and they keep seeing these numbers, exit velocity and whatnot. And baseball is a team sport. It's an individual sport, and it's a mixture of both. You have to have a good team and good connections with your fellow teammates in order to have a good season. But you also have to be locked in internally and mentally focused, because it's a mental game. And you could have the best exit velocity, best swing path, and whatnot, but if you're overthinking it and if something's not clicking, then your average is going to dip. I've seen it firsthand.
I worked with Theo Epstein with the San Diego Padres, then with the Boston Red Sox. When Theo became the youngest GM in baseball history, when he was hired by the Red Sox, the first two hires he made were Bill James, the father of modern analytics, and
Hmm.
Bill LaJoy, who at that time was probably in his 70s, had been the general manager of the Tigers in the 80s, had been with several clubs, one of the great scouts, one of the great baseball minds in the game. So, yes, Bill James is a big hire, but Bill LaJoy's voice was every bit as important to Theo Epstein as Bill James's voice. And that's why Theo's going to Cooperstown. That's why Theo accomplished what he did with the Red Sox and later with the Cubs, because he has a firm understanding of, yes, there's a time and a place for this, and there's a time and a place for that. And you've got to marry the two. It's just not as simple as turning every game into a mathematical equation.
Yep, you hit the nail on the head, Glenn. And I hope that the Marlins understand that moving forward. I hope they don't turn everything into a math class. Like you said, it's not just numbers. Games are played on the field. Guys that might not be as talented are going to outwork other guys. We see it all the time. We saw Sandy Alcantara, uh, you know, grow from being passed over from the Cardinals. He was their 4th ranked prospect, and the Cardinals said, "No, we're not trading you, Alex Reyes. We're not trading you this guy. We'll trade you Sandy Alcantara for Marcell Ozuna, develop into a Cy Young winner based on hard work." I truly believe that. It's hard work.
No doubt. No
Uh,
one works harder. No one
no.
works harder. No
And
doubt.
that is what I love about baseball. That is why Sandy is a true, relic in this game, of a throwback, if you will, back to the days where pitchers wanted to stay out on the mound and wanted to pitch 9 innings. And it's a shame that he's not out there this season. I look forward to him returning to the mound. But Sandy Alcantara and his presence on the mound reminds me of the fact that pitching deep into games now is a lost art. And this is the last topic I kind of want to get into, because I love it, man. I love watching a pitcher go out and dominate hitters and want to be out on the mound for the complete game. And now with this new age of analytics, like we're
It's
talking about,
analytics driven.
that's
Exactly.
what
We
it
were
comes
talking about
down
it's
to.
driven by analytics.
Yep. And these guys are pitching 5 innings, or you'll have openers. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I think it takes away from the beauty of baseball. Um, but why did we get away from that in our sport? Why did we get away from that mentality? Managers, players alike. What do you think about that?
Well, and it starts the minor leagues too, when these pitchers are being brought along, even the highest draft picks, where they're going 3 innings at a time, 4 innings at a time. I know there are organizations that have rules like he can't be on the mound if the tying man is in the on deck circle from the 5th inning on. Well, then how do you learn how to compete in a big spot at the big league level if you can't compete in a big spot pitching in Chattanooga, Tennessee on a Wednesday night? Uh, I understand there's a lot of money invested in these pitchers and you're trying to keep people healthy. Well, they've made all these changes and they're not keeping anybody healthy because guys are chasing spin rate. They're chasing velocity. And that's why you're seeing all these elbows and shoulders blow out. And you're seeing record numbers of pitchers on the injured list undergoing Tommy John surgeries. There was a time when if I was going to a baseball game, if I was getting ready to call a baseball game, the first question I asked is, who are the starters? I want to know who's pitching tonight. You get excited when you have certain pitching matchups going to the ballpark. Now it doesn't even matter because it's some guy you've never heard of for the other team that's going to go the 1st inning and the 3rd before the bulk man comes in, before they get to the middle relief, and all the guys that nobody wants to see. It detracts again from the fan experience. So this may be the ultimate indictment of analytics and the ultimate indictment of where Major League Baseball is today. So much of what may be helping teams in terms of talent evaluation, roster construction, with some of these analytics and looking at numbers and doing things different ways, devaluing the stolen base, devaluing the sacrifice point, whatever it is actually making for a less entertaining game on the field. And that turns fans off. Fans want to see Max Scherzer pitching in the 8th inning, Sandy Alcantara trying to get the complete game. That's what people want to see. That's why those guys win Cy Young awards. That's why those guys have earned the contracts they've earned over the years. And you just don't see that anymore. And now, of all the stats, and certainly this is far from the analytics stat, but the stat that drives me crazy is the concept of a quality start. 6 innings pitched, 3 earned runs or fewer. Not just 3 runs or fewer, 3 earned runs or fewer. You give up 9 runs, 3 earned. That's a quality start. But let's just say 6 innings, 3 earned runs. It's a 4.50 ERA. That's a quality start. Give me 7 and 2. Okay, I tip my cap to you. Save the bullpen a little bit. But pitchers from the day they get to the minor leagues now are looking over their shoulder. As soon as somebody gets on base in the 4th inning and the 5th inning, they know they're going to be out of the game at any point. Nobody is taught, like Sandy, to sniff the finish line, to want to see the finish line. And that's why I loved watching Sandy pitch and hope to see him pitching again in 2025 and beyond, whether it's here or elsewhere. That's why a guy like a Max Scherzer or the prime, the Randy Johnsons, the Kurt Schillings, the guys like that were so much fun to watch. They were bulldogs. You couldn't take the ball out of their hand. They wanted to finish the game. They wanted to be out there in the tough spots, not hand it over to some middle reliever who's pitching for his fourth team in the last 4 seasons and making $1.5 million. Who do you want on the mound with a game on the line? You want Randy Johnson or Kurt Schilling or Sandy Alcantara or Max Scherzer, guys like that. And you're just not seeing that anymore. And that's detracting from the enjoyment of the game, I think, for a lot of fans, whether or not they even realize that in 2024.
I think another thing that I think about that takes the place of, let's say, the competitiveness and the drive of pitchers is starting earlier in travel ball or high school, but mainly travel ball. You have all these travel ball leagues, and kids go up and they are pitchers only. That's a big thing. It's a pitcher only phenomenon, I guess, because you had for 100 years Little League going on, and everybody wanted to hit, everybody wanted to pitch, everybody wanted to play the field. And now you have these elite travel ball leagues where parents are paying thousands of dollars for in-season tournaments and all this and whatnot. And kids just want to pitch, and they'll pitch 3-4 innings and then they'll be done for the weekend. Like, where is that competitive drive? And look at guys look at Zach Greinke, who Sandy Alcantara mentality. He wanted to swing the bat. You had Madison Bumgarner, same mentality, wanted to swing the bat. I know I'm not advocating for pitchers hitting, but I think it's an internal mindset as well. If a pitcher wants to pitch 7 innings, he's going to pitch 7 innings. I really believe that more often than not. And I look at the Marlins and I see Sixto Sanchez struggle to get through 5 innings almost every start. Well, he's also going out there in the first inning and throwing 91 miles an hour, and then in the third, he's throwing 96. Like, it doesn't make sense. What is the level of effort you're willing to put in every day at your craft?
Yeah, and to take your point about travel ball a step further, there was also a time where not just people played multiple positions, they played multiple sports. And there are skills you develop playing basketball or football or soccer or any other sport that are going to help you athletically on the baseball field as well, as opposed to people who just play baseball 12 months a year. And maybe that's why more pitchers are breaking down, because they're pitching 12 months a year rather than pitching 4 months a year, 5 months a year, as they did at one time, and playing quarterback in the fall and playing shooting guard in the winter. There's a lot to be said for that too. So that's the society in which we live, and the toothpaste is out of the tube. I don't think that we're going to be able to do anything to change that at this point. But I do wish you could go back to the days where athletes were not so focused, locked in on one sport so early in their lives. You're 10, 11 years old. You've got to commit to baseball now. It's probably not the best thing for anybody, physically, mentally, to not try different things. And athletically, it's not the best thing. But you're right. And to come back to Sixto, who you mentioned for a second there, we talked about Sandy and the work ethic. I said this many times in 2020, and I believed this when I said it in 2020, when Sixto first came up and was having a lot of success. And I watched Sixto, and I didn't think it would happen very soon again, if ever. But you start to get that Jose Fernandez vibe about the electricity of this guy on the mound. And the line I use repeatedly is, if this guy is going to put in the work, if this guy is going to put in the time and devote himself, he's got a chance to be that kind of a difference maker. And the reason I said that was because internally, there were already rumblings that he did not have that Jose Fernandez personality, where he was, like Sandy Alcantara, going to do everything in his power to get better, to take care of himself. How many times he showed up to spring training overweight, out of shape? There were off seasons where the Marlins literally sent him back to the Dominican Republic and told him to take pictures of every piece of food he ate in the off season. They
Wow.
wanted to make sure he was taking care of himself. Well, let's just say not all the pictures were taken. They didn't all come through, but they knew in the beginning that this kid may not have the mentality, the work ethic. He's got all the talent in the world. And it's so frustrating to me when somebody has all that talent and doesn't take advantage of it. And unfortunately, I think that's kind of where we are all these years later with Sixto. And say, well, he's had injury problems. Yeah, you know what? Some of those injury problems come from showing up to spring training out of shape and trying to make up for lost time, throwing too hard, too quickly in early March, which we've seen with him in the past. I know there were some things I think implied on social media yesterday that Sixto going on the injured list might not because of something that happened on the field, and I don't have inside information on that. But one of your key Marlins insiders implied on social media yesterday that something might have happened off the field with Sixto. That is why he's on the injured list right now. And at this point, it's so unfortunate. It's so unfortunate. You can't count on him moving forward in any role, unfortunately. But he had so much talent when he showed up. Had he been more like Jose, had he been more like Sandy Alcantara, we could be talking about Sixto going back to his 4th All-Star game this year. But that's unfortunately not the case.
So much potential, and it seems like it was all thrown away, all gone to waste with the injuries. And then, this season was kind of his final shot, obviously, to carve a role for himself. And he's still starting until just yesterday when he got placed on the injured list. But I too remember 2020, that Cubs series, watching him, and he goes 5 shutout, and the sinker's at 100 miles an hour. He's got that wicked changeup that just darts away, or darts to the outside if you're a righty. It's just it was great to see. It was great to see, and I thought he was like the next ace. I really did. I thought, because at that time Sandy really hadn't
And
truly
again,
emerged.
and I'll go back to what I said. If he has the work ethic, if he
Yep.
puts in the time, he's got a chance to be that guy the Marlins haven't had since Jose Fernandez. Just along the lines of what you're saying, he had that chance. He didn't take advantage of it, unfortunately. And he can't, well, he got hurt. There are reasons why some people have a higher incidence of injury than others, and he's never taken care of himself.
Never took care of himself. And there's an old quote I remember reading when I was a kid. It's hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I love that quote. I always think about that quote when it comes to sports, but in really any aspect of life, when you dedicate yourself to a craft. And you look at super talented players, Shohei Ohtani, who can throw 100 miles an hour and hit 450-foot home runs, the next inning. And yes, he's extremely talented. He's got a great physique, screams, I'm a star baseball player, but he puts in the work. And then you have guys like Hall of Famer, who sure as heck is going to be, one of the best to ever play and ever to be remembered, Ichiro Suzuki. I loved Ichiro Suzuki because you hear the stories of Ichiro and the way he worked with his dad for hours hitting balls in the cage. He wasn't the biggest guy, he wasn't the strongest guy or the fastest, but man, he could throw accurate, he could swing and know exactly where the ball was going to go off his bat because of the way he studied the game, the hours he put in the cage. And that is what made him a Hall of Famer. And that's the beauty of baseball.
You talk about Ichiro, and it was a privilege for me to get to watch him at the very end of his career in Miami. And one of the things I remember about him when you talk about his work ethic is, remember, in the end, he was a pinch hitter and really nothing more for the Marlins than a pinch hitter. But literally every single Sunday morning, home or road, empty ballpark, 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, he'd be in the outfield long tossing to keep his arms stretched out. And from one foul line to the other practically, at age 40, whatever, as a pinch hitter, making sure that he still had the arm strength that he would need if called upon. That was the kind of work ethic he had. And I kind of bookended my time with the Padres and the Marlins with Ichiro in Miami at the end, and I was with Tony Gwynn in San Diego, and I watched his work ethic. And I tell kids all the time who want to go out and take batting practice, hit. You know what Tony Gwynn would do every single day? He'd hit off a tee all by himself into a net, and he'd move the tee to the outside part of the plate, and he'd move it to the inside part of the plate, and he'd work on getting balls deep in the zone and out in front of the plate. Tony Gwynn hit off the tee every single day of his career. He didn't just fall into 3,141 hits and a 338 lifetime batting average. He worked his butt off. And he was born a great hitter. No, he worked as hard on his hitting as anybody. I remember every spring with the Marlins, I'd go across early in the spring and just watch the Cardinals for a day on the other side, just see what somebody else is doing, see some great players and catch the vibe over there on the Cardinals side. I remember watching Albert Pujols during batting practice, working on getting a secondary lead off of second base into third base. Here, this is not a great base runner. This is a Hall of Fame, one of the legends of the game, but just working in early mid-February on getting a secondary lead off of second base and third base. Little things like that nobody ever sees. That's what the great players do. That's why they're the great players. And some people have that desire and that commitment, and others don't.
I love it. I love those stories, Glenn. Hitting off a tee when you don't have to per se, when nobody expects you to. You've already won 5 Silver Sluggers, and it's a Sunday game. You're probably tired all the way on the East Coast, and you're gonna hit off the tee. Like that is great stuff, and that's why he is forever a legend. Um, I want to thank you, Glenn, for coming on the podcast. As we wrap it up here, that was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
It was a blast. I really enjoyed it, Jeremiah. And I know there's some other things you wanted to get into that I guess I went long on this stuff, but let's do it again sometime. I'm happy to do it if you want to talk more baseball history and some of those things. I've got my podcast out now, Crooked Numbers, which is a baseball history, baseball story heavy podcast. I hope people will check it out, but would love to talk to you more about some other non-Marlins stuff at some point soon.
I'd love to do it, Glenn. I would absolutely love to do it. So with that, guys, subscribe to the pod. Go check out Glenn's podcast, Crooked Numbers. I actually listened to it the other day. One of the episodes, good stuff over there. Really good stories and stats, all that stuff over there. And with that, let's go fish.